Monday, 14th of February, 1994, Russia. A 57-year-old man is led from a prison cell to the execution chamber. No standing on ceremony here. This was to be over very quickly. In the darkness of the room, the dishevelled middle-aged man is forcibly sat down in a chair. Out from behind the door steps a man with a pistol drawn. He places the muzzle of the gun just behind the prisoner's ear and pulls the trigger, putting an end to one of the most twisted individuals to have ever walked the earth. But who was this man, and what had earned him such a swift death? Join us as Descent into Darkness examines the case of the man the Russian press dubbed the Rostov Ripper, Andrei Chikatilo. And before we start, please note that there will be a lot of Russian and Ukrainian names in this video, and I will undoubtedly get them wrong. If you want to have a go at me in the comments, go nuts. It all helps boost engagement anyway. Biography. Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo was born on the 16th of October 1936 in Yabluchne, Ukraine. It is safe to say that little Andrei didn't have the most nurturing of childhoods. Quite the opposite, sadly. Certainly not helped by the Ukraine still recovering from the devastation reaped by Joseph Stalin's horrific collectivization policy, which resulted in widespread famine, a period of history known as the Holodomor, or death by hunger. Such a time understandably led to some desperate people resorting to some horrific and/or immoral things just to get some measly scraps of food. And then, of course, we cannot forget the invasion of the Ukraine by Nazi Germany as part of Operation Barbarossa. Ukraine really can't catch a break, can they? Andrei claimed that during the war, he witnessed his hometown being bombed by the Luftwaffe and saw people being shot on a regular basis and having to hide from both sides in ditches and cellars. On top of this, his father, Roman, was conscripted into the Red Army in 1941, who then went off to war and was taken prisoner after being wounded in battle. Andrei's mother may have been raped by either German or Soviet soldiers during the war, as 2 years after Roman had left to fight, she gave birth to a daughter named Tatiana. It is highly likely that Andrei may have even witnessed the rape. Thankfully, Roman was able to survive the war and came home to the family when it was all over. However, because he was taken prisoner, the Soviet state disgracefully branded him a traitor, which led to ostracism within the local community. Chikatilo himself later claimed that his family very rarely had any food, and often had to improvise as best they could, even resorting to eating grass. He further said that he had never even tasted bread until he was around 12 years old. His mother doesn't seem to have been the maternal type either, regularly tormenting young Andrei, telling him that before he was born, his older brother Stepan had been killed by their neighbours and cannibalized. I have no idea why the hell you would ever tell that to a child, true or not. Due to the family's abject poverty, both mother and son were forced to sleep in the same bed, but this led to problems, as young Andrei suffered from chronic bedwetting for a long time. This earned him a beating from his mother every time it happened. Again, not the sort of environment that will yield a well-adjusted child. On the flip side, Roman was described later by Tatiana as a loving father who treated the children well. Andrei's constant malnourishment led to his stomach swelling, his growth being stunted, and regular instances of fainting. This made him a prime target for local bullies, who mocked his appearance and his tatty clothing, which was a cobbled-together combination of other garments that his mother was able to make. Despite the hardships that he had to endure, Andrei threw himself wholeheartedly into his schoolwork, becoming a top student and well liked by his teachers. He displayed a great aptitude for absorbing facts and figures and demonstrating his knowledge, achieving much praise and awards for his work. At home, he often had his nose buried in a book, which was a big help to him as he suffered from short-sightedness, which made it difficult for him to properly see the blackboard at school. As he grew into a young teen, no doubt thanks to the deep Soviet indoctrination, Andrei was a committed communist and keen follower of Stalin, even becoming the chairman of the local student Communist Party and the editor of his school's newspaper. He pushed on with his studies, graduating in 1954. But with the advance in age came new problems for him. He found that, despite taking an interest in girls, he suffered from impotence, which gave Andrei a serious inferiority complex and a distinct lack of confidence, an extreme social awkwardness, especially around women. Worryingly, a particular incident during this time occurred which was a dark foreshadowing of things to come. At some point, he was play fighting with one of Tatiana's young friends, an 11-year-old girl. He wrestled her to the ground, but as she struggled against him, he experienced a spontaneous orgasm. Andrei applied to the Moscow State University to continue his studies, but whilst his entrance exam had returned respectable grades, they weren't quite good enough to get himself a place, and so he was forced to consider other options. This led to him ending up in Kursk for 3 months, working as a basic labourer, whilst he attempted to secure a place at a vocational school. He was accepted, and Andrei was now learning the trade of a communications technician. During this time, he entered an ultimately failed relationship with a local lass, but his chronic impotence came back to haunt him as he was still unable to perform satisfactorily, which led to her breaking off the relationship after 18 months. Following the end of his course, he decided to move to Nizhny Tagil in the Ural region to apply his newfound skills to a large construction project taking place there. Not resting on his laurels, he continued his studies in the subject via a correspondence course with the Moscow Electrotechnical Institute of Communication. For 2 years he worked happily away until 1957, when the Red Army came knocking for 3 years compulsory service. He would be posted to the border with Asia, and then to East Berlin, where his skills were put to use at a KGB unit. His performance during his military service was considered exemplary, and he was honourably discharged in 1960 when his time was up. He completed his full Soviet indoctrination just before he left by joining the Big Boys Communist Party. He decided to return home, where he put in work on the collective farm nearest to him, where his parents still toiled. This would see yet another failed relationship for him, when he got close with a young divorcee. This would only last for 3 months, though, as once again, Andrei's little soldier was found sleeping at his post. This led to widespread ridicule as she decided to gossip amongst her gal pals. This had a very deep psychological impact on him, even leading him to consider suicide. Andrei later said, quote, "Girls were going behind my back, whispering that I was impotent. I was so ashamed. I tried to hang myself. My mother and some young neighbours pulled me out of the noose. Well, I thought no one would want such a shamed man, so I had to run away from there, away from my homeland." But despite the self-imposed exile to Rostov-on-Don, he would not be lonely for long, as he was finally able to meet a good woman who was able to look past his shortcomings in the sack. She was named Feodosia Odnacheva, but this would not be a regular relationship, more of an arranged marriage with introductions being made by Andrei's sister, and the two being wed only a couple of weeks later. They managed to find a way around his impotence by basically having him jerk it and then going to town with the old fingers. Who said romance is dead, eh? But this had a happy conclusion as the couple were able to conceive. In 1965, they welcomed baby Lyudmila into their lives, and in 1969 they were joined by a son named Yuri. Seemingly the hurdles had been overcome, and Andrei Chikatilo was finally winning at life. With the move to Rostov came the opportunity for Andrei to expand his knowledge as he enrolled as a distance learner at Rostov University, working towards a degree in literature and philology, which is the study of oral and written historical sources, in case you were as curious as I was. He obtained his degrees in both of these topics, and then took up a year-long job in charge of organising regional sports activities, before he decided to share his accumulated knowledge with others by becoming a teacher at the very catchily titled Vocational School No. 32 in the nearby mining town of Novoshakhtinsk. Sadly, this did not go well for him, as Andrei's quiet and humble nature led the students to being absolute little knobs, regularly disturbing the class and ignoring their tutor altogether. Andrei's personality and character just did not command the respect that others did, and he became the figure of fun for his class. The school was a mixed boarding school, and Andrei's dark side began to show itself as he would attempt to sneak into the girls' dorms in the hope of slyly watching them undress. But he would get more than he bargained for when some of the boys inevitably snuck out of their dorm for assignations with the girls. This thoroughly shocked Andrei, who described what he saw as, quote, "children doing what I hadn't done, even when I was 30 years old. Kinda sounds like a touch of jealousy there, my man." But this would give Andrei the idea that if they were ready for that sort of thing, Then why shouldn't he get himself a slice of that? Well, I can think of a very good reason why, but let's set that aside. Beginning in May of 1973, Andrei began attempting various ways to sexually molest his students. The very first occasion involved a swimming lesson, during which he groped a young female student. The second when he locked another female in his classroom, whereupon he groped and beat her. He got a big thrill from both incidents, neither of which he was punished for, possibly due to his membership of the Communist Party, which could have potentially made things difficult for whomever stood up to him. He continued to systematically target both boys and girls, both in and out of school, gaining their trust by offering things like chewing gum, a rarity amongst the poorer Soviet citizens. The growing number of complaints forced the school administrators to give him the choice of either resignation or being sacked. He chose the former. But because he had resigned, and had not been punished for any of his wrongdoings, he was quickly able to get himself another teaching job in the town of Shakti, 47 miles north of Rostov. It was from Shakti that Andrei Chikatilo would begin his murderous ways. Murders and investigation. As has become the standard for this channel, I have scoured Tinternet to find as much details as I could on every single one of Chikatilo's victims to tell their story, and remind everyone that they were real people and not just a statistic. Although of course it is not possible to find a full breakdown of absolutely everyone, but I did my best. And so, here we go. 13th of November, 1978. Lena Zakotnova, age 9. Andrei's first foray into the dark world of murder would come in the November of 1978, when he spotted 9-year-old Lena Zakotnova walking home from the local ice rink. He decided to act on the urges that had been building within him for a while. He approached the young girl and put on a show of friendliness to lure her away from prying eyes and into the nearby woods where they would not be seen. Once they were out of sight, Chikatilo quickly seized the girl and covered her mouth to stifle her screams, and began to sexually assault and attempt to rape her. But even in this, he was still unable to achieve arousal. The frustration grew within him, causing him to take out his rage on Lena, seeing her as a proxy for the humiliation he felt from women in his previous failed attempts at intercourse. He took out a small knife and stabbed her. It was at this moment that everything changed for Chikatilo and turned him into a psychosexual monster. Perhaps at that time he had harkened back to the earlier situation with his sister's friend, but at that very moment he stabbed the poor little girl, he experienced another spontaneous orgasm, literally creaming his undercrackers for killing a child. Seemingly, this was the answer to his impotence problems. After he stabbed her 3 times in the abdomen, he strangled her until she lost consciousness, dumping her body and fleeing the scene. It would be another 3 years until Chikatilo decided to indulge his murderous side once again, or at least, that we know of. Lena's body would be found on Christmas Eve 1978, underneath a small bridge over the Grashevka River. The Soviet police fitted up a local man who had recently come out of jail for rape and murder, named Alexandra Kravchenko, for the murder of Zakotnova, no doubt wanting a quick conviction. Kravchenko had a solid alibi, but pressure was put on his wife, who eventually amended her statement to reflect the timings the police suspected that Lena had been killed. Kravchenko cracked and confessed to a murder that he did not commit. Initially, he was sentenced to death, but this was commuted to 15 years in 1980. However, because Lena's family was so convinced by the police's flimsy case that this was the man who murdered their daughter, they were able to successfully push for a retrial, which once again found Kravchenko guilty, and this time the death sentence was reimposed and carried out in July 1983. Chikatilo had gotten away scot-free with his first murder, but sadly, it would be far from his last. In the March of 1981, Chikatilo would give up his teaching career after more and more complaints of impropriety from his students. Instead, he decided to go for a job as a supply clerk at a construction materials factory in Rostov. This job would see him travelling extensively throughout the Soviet Union, negotiating supply contracts. This was a job that he was way overqualified for, but he still carried it out with diligence, earning him much admiration from his superiors. However, it also meant that it brought him into contact with a slew of potential new victims in the areas to which he travelled. 3rd of September, 1981. Larissa Tkachenko, age 17. When the urges boiled up inside Chikatilo once more, he had just exited the Rostov Public Library when he saw Larissa Tkachenko standing at a nearby bus stop. He saw that she was in her late teens and so struck up a conversation on the pretext of luring her away. He spoke of going into the woods to drink vodka and relax in the serenity of nature. The lure of illicit booze consumption was enough for her, and off they went. Way to eschew cultural stereotypes, eh, Russia? Once they were out of sight in the woods, Chikatilo once again went to work. He grabbed her and threw her to the ground and began tearing at her clothes. However, his attempted rape once again proved unsuccessful due to his impotence, and so he beat Larissa, stuffing mud into her mouth to stifle her screams before strangling her. He did not have a knife this time, so he used a long stick and even his teeth to mutilate her body after she lost consciousness. He even bit off one of her nipples completely. Once he was satisfied, he covered her body with leaf litter and other nearby detritus before fleeing the scene. Larissa's body would be discovered the very next day. 12th of June, 1982. Lyubov Biryuk, age 13. Now that his urges had come to the surface again, Andrei would not take long before his next victim. 9 months after his previous murder, he was walking home from buying vegetables near the village of Donskoy when he encountered the 13-year-old Lyubov Biryuk, who was walking home on her own after having been out shopping. He walked with her for around a quarter of a mile until he spotted an overgrown area not far from the roadside, away from potential witnesses. He used the opportunity and pounced on the little girl, dragging her off into the bushes a few yards away. He tore Lyubov's dress away and took out a knife and then began stabbing and slashing at her body, all while essentially dry-humping her as he did so as part of his sick ritual to get himself off. Her body would not be discovered for another 2.5 weeks, covered in 22 stab wounds, concentrating on her head, neck, groin, and chest. It was also found that she had several marks in her eye sockets, suggesting that her attacker had perhaps half-heartedly attempted to remove the eyeballs, a fact that would recur many times in the following victims. Chikatilo later described the murder in much the same as above, thusly, quote, "I noticed that a girl, 12 or 13, was coming behind me carrying some kind of bag in her hand. I slowed down and let her catch up to me. We walked together beside the woods. I started talking to her about whatever I thought might interest her. I remember she said she was going home from the store. I pushed her off the road and grabbed her by the waist and dragged her into the woods. I pushed her onto the ground, tore off her clothing and lay on her. At the same time I was stabbing her, imitating sex. From that, I ejaculated. I threw her clothes and bag away somewhere, but I don't remember where." Following this murder, Chikatilo had made the decision that he would no longer attempt to suppress any urge when it came to him. If he saw someone that he could take advantage of, he would just do it. This led to the frequency of murders increasing alarmingly. As far as the police knew at this stage, Lyubov Biryuk was the first victim that they tied to their manhunt. 25th of July, 1982. Lyubov Volyobyeva, aged 14. The second person named Lyubov on this list, she was murdered and dumped near the airport at Krasnodar, in a village called Shaltyr, in an orchard. Her body would not be found until the 7th of August. 13th of August, 1982. Oleg Pozhitayev, age 9. Oleg would be Chikatilo's first male victim. He was killed in Adygea. Sadly, his body has never been found. He was killed in some woodland outside the town of Enem. It is interesting to note from here on out that Chikatilo did not limit himself to females. He was just as open to abusing and murdering males as well. For him, it was not so much the attraction side that he went for. The person was simply a means to an end for his gratification. Their characteristics were seemingly irrelevant to him, other than ease of access and willingness to go with him under false pretenses. August 1982. Olga Kuprina, age 16. Olga was a runaway from the district of Semikarakorsky. She was killed in Kazachi Her body was found on the 27th of October, the same year, by a soldier who was gathering firewood. 12th of September, 1982. Irina Karabelnikova, age 19. The first of Chikatilo's adult victims, he would go on to target runaways, waifs and strays and sex workers. Not that there is any evidence to suggest that Irina was herself a sex worker, but do keep this in mind as we progress down the list. She was, however, a vagrant. Irina was lured away from the railway station in Shakti, her body being found 8 days later. She would not be identified until 1985. Irina's father would later erect this small memorial at the spot where her body was discovered. September 1982. Sergei Kuzmin, aged 15. Sergei was a runaway from an orphanage. Unfortunately, he was taken in by Chikatilo's kindly nature. His body was found near Shakti railway station in January of 1983. By the time his body was found, most likely due to decomposition and animal predation, no soft tissue was left on his body. Initially, he was mistaken for female. 11th of December, 1982. Olga Stamenchonok, aged 10. Olga was on her way home on a bus, having been to a piano lesson in Novoshakhtinsk. When Chikatilo was alone with her body in a nearby cornfield, he stabbed her as many as 50 times and mutilated by having her chest ripped open and her intestines spilled, with lengths cut out and left near the body. Her body would not be found until the following April. At his trial, Chikatilo was cleared of this murder, but he did in fact kill her. Later in January of the new year, with police having conclusively linked 4 murders to the same person, a senior investigator was dispatched from Moscow to Rostov, named Mikhail Fetisov, to head up the inquiry. 3 months later, Fetisov appointed a dedicated forensic analyst to the case, Viktor Burakov. Burakov was appraised of the previously found bodies, and surmised that they were hunting a serial murderer. This was all but confirmed the very next month, when Olga Stelmachenuk's body was found, showing, amongst many other mutilations, a focus on the eye sockets. Later, Chikatilo would confess to a further 3 victims that he supposedly killed in the area of Shakti between 1980 and 1982, but police were unable to find any more bodies or match any missing person reports to these extra victims, and so he was never charged with their murders. June 1983. Laura Sarkisian, aged 15. Hailing from Armenia, Laura's body was found near an unused platform in Shakti railway station. Chikatilo would be cleared of this murder at his trial due to insufficient evidence. July 1983. Irina Donenkova, aged 13. On the 8th of August 1983, Irina's body was found in a place called Aviators Park in Rostov. Chikatilo had known her for a time before he killed her. She suffered from an unknown mental disability. Summer 1983. Lyudmila Kushuba, aged 24. Lyudmila's body was found near the bus station in Shakti in a patch of woodland on the 12th of March 1984. She was a homeless mother of 2. 9th of August 1983. Igor Gudkov, aged 7. Igor would be the first male victim that police linked to the same killer as that of the previously discovered ones. He would also be Chikatilo's youngest victim. September 1983. Valentina Chuchulina, aged 22. Valentina's body was found on the 27th of November in a wooded area near the railway station in Kirpichnaya. At some time around this point, the police were working with a few different theories as to who could be behind such a prolific string of murders, even going as far as to entertain the thought of a satanic cult or an organ harvesting gang. Another being that their killer might be a mentally ill person, although that definition extended to homosexuals. Records from mental institutions were poured through and suspects painstakingly eliminated. Much like during the British investigation into the so-called Yorkshire Ripper, a topic I previously made the most extensive documentary ever produced, link in the description. The records were kept via a card indexing system, which very soon became overwhelmed by the sheer weight of evidence. Due to the heavy-handed tactics of Soviet police, a handful of mentally ill people confessed to the murders after prolonged and brutal interrogation methods. 3 individuals were homosexual men, who subsequently sadly committed suicide following their grilling at the hands of the state. But there was a silver lining to this rather dark cloud, as a string of other crimes, including 95 unrelated murders and around 245 sexual assaults and rapes, were solved during this time, although we'll just have to take it on faith that the real perpetrators were caught. Date unknown. Unknown female, aged 18 to 25. Chikatilo confessed to this murder, in which he claimed that she was a sex worker soliciting on the street, so he picked her up and killed her. 27th of October 1983. Vera Shevkun, aged 19. A known prostitute, Vera's body was found 3 days after she was killed just outside a mining village near Shakti. However, despite the body being horrifically mutilated, her eyes had not been damaged. 27th of December 1983. Sergei Markov, aged 14. Sergei was travelling home from a work experience placement. His body was found on the 4th of January 1984 near Novocherkassk. He had been savagely mutilated with up to 70 stab wounds to his neck and upper torso, and he had even been castrated. 9th of January 1984. Natalia Shalapinina, aged 17. Natalia was a close friend of a previous victim, Olga Kulparina. 21st of February 1984. Marta Ryabenko, aged 45. Another victim killed in Aviators Park, Rostov, Marta would be Chikatilo's oldest victim. Her body was found the next day. 24th of March 1984. Dmitry Ptashnikov, aged 10. An avid stamp collector, Dmitry met Chikatilo at a stamp kiosk and pretended to be a fellow collector. This was enough to convince the young boy to go off with him. A footprint was found at the scene of his murder, as well as semen and saliva samples. Witnesses from that day put together a rough sketch of the man that they had seen Dmitry walking off with before his disappearance. 25th of May 1984. Tatiana Petrosyan, aged 32, and Svetlana Petrosyan, aged 11. Mother and daughter, both were killed by Chikatilo somewhere outside Shakti. Tatiana had known her killer since 1978. Tatiana was killed first, but Svetlana was unfortunate enough to have witnessed the murder, and so she was chased down for over half a mile and killed by being battered to death with a hammer and then decapitated. Svetlana's body was found on the 5th of July. Tatiana would not be identified until the following year. June 1984. Yelena Bakulina, aged 22. Yelena's body was found on the 27th of August, having been killed in the Bagasinsky area of Rostov. She had been stabbed to death, and then her body covered with leaf litter and fallen branches. 10th of July 1984. Dmitry Ilarionov, aged 13. Dmitry was on his way to collect a certificate of health in Rostov so that he could attend a summer camp. He was never seen alive again. He was killed in a cornfield and had been crudely castrated. 19th of July 1984. Anna Lemesheva, aged 19. Anna was on her way to the dentist in Shakti when she encountered Chikatilo. She was found near Kipichnaya railway station. July 1984. Svetlana Tsana, aged 20. Another victim killed in Aviators Park. Svetlana was originally from Riga in Latvia. Her body was found on the 9th of September. Of all his victims, Svetlana Tsana would be the very last that he confessed to. At some point in the summer of this year, Chikatilo lost his job with the building company as he had been pilfering supplies. However, he was able to find a similar job with another company in Rostov by the first day of August. The day after he secured this new job, he would kill once more. 2nd of August 1984, Natalia Golosovskaya, age 16. Natalia was on her way to visit her sister in Novoshakhtinsk. She never made it. 7th of August 1984, Lyudmila Alexeyeva, age 17. Lyudmila was lured away from the bus stop in Rostov when Chikatilo offered to direct her to the main bus station. She was found on the banks of the River Don. Her body showed many wounds thought to have been made before death that were deliberately non-fatal. A total of 39 stab wounds were found before she had then been eviscerated, and even her top lip had been cut off and stuffed into her mouth. Date unknown. Unknown female, aged 20 to 25. This sadly nameless victim crossed paths with her killer when Chikatilo was on a business trip to the Uzbek capital of Tashkent. Chikatilo had flown there only hours after the killing of Lyudmila Alexeyeva. She was found on the banks of the Cherchik River, decapitated. 13th of August 1984, Akmaral Zedalieva, aged 11. Another victim killed in Tashkent. Akmaral was a runaway from Alma-Ata in Kazakhstan. She had been battered and stabbed to death in a cornfield. 28th of August 1984, Alexander Chepel, aged 11. Alexander's body was discovered on the banks of the Don River, only yards away from where Alexeyeva's body had been found and removed. Alexander Chepel's body had been castrated and his eyes gouged out. The cause of death was ruled as strangulation. 6th of September 1984, Irina Luchinskaya, aged 24. Yet another victim found in Aviators Park. Irina was a local librarian on her way to a sauna. A few days after the 13th of September, 2 undercover agents spotted Chikatilo attempting to engage a young woman in conversation in the Rostov bus station. They followed him and observed him trying to similarly chat up other young women and rubbing up against them, an act I'm reliably told is called frotteurism, around town until he reached the city centre, whereupon the agents decided that they had seen enough and swooped in to arrest him. When Chikatilo was searched, they found an 8-inch knife, several lengths of rope, and a jar of Vaseline. Sounds like a rape kit, if ever I heard one. It further turned out that he was wanted in relation to a minor theft from one of his former bosses, which gave the police a good excuse to hold him for longer than usual. Further investigation threw up a match in description to the man that had been seen with Dmitry Tashkinov just before he was murdered, and so police took blood samples. They came back with blood type A, which sadly did not match the semen samples found on 6 of the victims that had been found to that date, which had been determined to be type AB, which meant that he was virtually eliminated from the murder inquiry. But he was found guilty of the theft, so was sentenced to a year behind bars, would only serve 3 months before being released on the 12th of December. His membership of the Communist Party was revoked. Police had been shamefully locking up mentally disabled individuals and coercing them into confessing to the killings. However, on the 8th of October 1984, a judge quite rightly surmised that 23 of the unsolved murders had been the work of the same person, which led to all of these wrongfully accused people being released with no charges. 1st of August 1985, Natalia Poklistova, aged 18. Natalia was lured away from the railway station of an airport near Moscow called Domodedovo. Her body would not be found until the first day of August that year, only 200 meters from her home. Police checked all the flight records from the airport, but this gave no leads. Chikatilo had travelled by train. 27th of August 1985. Irina Gulyaeva, aged 18. Found the day after she was killed, Irina was murdered in a stand of trees near the bus station in Shakhty. Chikatilo wouldn't select another victim near Rostov for another 3 years. Perhaps he was concerned that the large number of victims in the area was drawing more attention his way. By the November of this year, the investigation was expanded greatly to 29 investigators working under a procurator named Isa Kostoyev. After much lobbying of his superiors, Kostoyev and Borakov invited a forensic psychologist, a relatively new branch of criminal science for the time, to give a rough guide as to what kind of person they were looking for. Dr. Alexander Bukhanovsky. This would be the first instance of such a tactic being employed in Russia, underlining the seriousness of the case. Despite the overwhelming evidence that they did indeed have a serial killer on the loose, Kostoyev and Borakov's bosses were still of the opinion that such things were purely a Western problem, a symptom of capitalist decadence and indulgence. But thankfully, along with the backing of their immediate boss, Fetisov, the bigwigs gave in and allowed Bukhanovsky to proceed. Dr. Bukhanovsky compiled a 65-page dossier on the character he hypothesized could commit such acts. Strangely enough, this would end up matching Andrei Chikatilo to an almost unnerving degree of accuracy. It guessed, and I'm just giving you the cliff notes here, that the killer was a reclusive male character between the ages of 45 and 50, with a lot of childhood trauma. He had virtually no luck with women or some kind of sexual dysfunction, a high standard of education, and probably a wife and family. Due to the sexual dysfunction, the act of killing is his release, sadistic tendencies, the knife becoming a proxy for the penis. The act of the blade penetrating flesh is the metaphor for sex in his mind. His work requires him to travel regularly, most likely tied to a production schedule. As you can see, this is absolutely cock-on for Andrei Chikatilo. Clearly, forensic psychological profiling has its merits. It's even more impressive when you consider that it was the first time that anyone in Russia had to create such a profile from scratch. Which is why Netflix shouldn't have cancelled Mindhunter, but I digress. Although, seriously, Netflix, the fuck? Anyway, moving on. 16th of May 1987. Oleg Makarenkov, aged 13. Oleg's body would not be found until Chikatilo was arrested and led police to his remains. A boarding school boy, he was killed in Revda, in the Sverdlovsk Oblast of the Ukraine. He had lured him with the promise of a meal back at Chikatilo's dacha. "29th of July 1987. Ivan Bilovetsky, aged 12. Found on the 30th of July by his own father, Ivan was killed in Zaporizhia in the Ukraine whilst Chikatilo was on one of his business trips. 15th of September 1987. Yuri Tereshonok, aged 16. Yuri's body was also not found until Chikatilo showed police where he was. This was somewhere in the Leningrad Oblast. Date unknown. Unknown female, aged 18 to 25. This nameless victim was killed near to the railway station in Krasny Sulin, in the grounds of a metalwork factory. Her body was found on the 6th of April. This marked the fourth murder committed by Chikatilo in 1987, none of which, you will note, were in the Rostov Oblast, and so were not connected to the same killer initially by the Soviet police detectives. 14th of May 1988. Alexei Voronko, aged 9. Alexei was killed near to the railway station in Ilovaisk, Ukraine, whilst Chikatilo was on his way to Artyomovsk. 14th of July 1988. Yevgeny Muratov, aged 15. Found in a forest on April 10, 1990, near Donlesho station, Yevgeny was the first victim killed in Rostov since 1985. February 1988. Tatiana Reshova, age 16. Tatiana was a runaway from Krasny Surin. She was killed in Chikatilo's own daughter's apartment, later dismembering and dumping her body elsewhere, which was found on the 9th of March. 11th of May 1989. Alexander Dyakonov, aged 8. Chikatilo became much more brazen with this murder, occurring right in Rostov city centre in a thicket of bushes. Alexander's body would not be found until the 14th of July by a taxi driver. 20th of June 1989. Alexei Moiseyev, aged 10. Alexei was killed in the eastern area of Moscow, known as the Vladimir district. Chikatilo would confess to this murder following his arrest. He described Alexei as, quote, a boy from Koljugino, Vladimir Oblast, whom I took from the beach into the forest. 19th of August 1989. Helena Varga, aged 19. A Hungarian student and a young mother, Helena was killed near a village outside of Rostov. 28th of August 1989. Alexei Khobotov, aged 10. Another whose body was found after being led to it by Chikatilo, Alexei was last seen outside a movie theatre in Shakhty. He was in a shallow grave near a cemetery. 14th of January 1990. Andrei Kravchenko, aged 11. Another victim last seen outside the theatre in Shakhty, Andrei Kravchenko's castrated body was found on the 19th of February. 7th of March 1990. Yaroslav Makarov, aged 10. Yaroslav was lured away from the Rostov railway station and killed near the city's botanical gardens. He had been castrated, and his tongue was also missing. April 1990. Lyubov Zoyeva, aged 31. Found on the 24th of October, Lyubov vanished from the railway station at Donleskoz, near Shakhty. By the time she was found, her body was just a skeleton. 27th of July 1990. Viktor Petrov, aged 13. Another victim found near the botanical gardens. Viktor was killed only a few yards away from where Yaroslav Makarov was found. He had been lured away from Rostov Glavny railway station, where his family were waiting for an early bus. 14th of August 1990. Ivan Fomin, aged 11. Ivan was killed on the beach at Novocherkassk. His body was found 3 days after he was murdered. He had gone behind a thicket of bushes to change into his swimming gear when Chikatilo pounced. Ivan had been castrated and stabbed 42 times. 17th of October 1990. Vadim Gromov, aged 16. A mentally disabled student from Shakhty on his way to Taganrog by train, Vadim, disappeared. 30th of October 1990. Viktor Tishchenko, aged 16. Viktor put up a spirited defense to Chikatilo whilst he tried to kill him, biting his killer's finger, ripping off the nail and breaking the bone. His body was found near Shakhty. 6th of November 1990. Svetlana Korostik, aged 22. Chikatilo's last known victim, Svetlana's body was found on the 13th of November in some woodland near Donleskoz. She was homeless at the time of her murder. It is further worth mentioning that the Soviet government throughout this time refused to acknowledge the existence of a serial killer on the loose until the implementation of the policy instituted under Mikhail Gorbachev called perestroika, or restructuring. This change to openness in Russian is called glasnost, or transparency, and was a key tenet of the perestroika policy. Capture, confession, and conviction. Throughout his murderous rampage, Chikatilo had followed the case against him very carefully via the newspapers, and he would adjust his behaviour accordingly, deciding to stop looking for victims in a particular area when the heat became too much. But this would not keep him from the long arm of the law forever. Police had rightly drawn the link between the pattern of murders and the main transport hubs, leading to the conclusion that their man must be using these transport links to move around and find his victims before quickly moving on to spend as little time in each area as possible to avoid being noticed. However, thanks to Barakov, the police had one way of luring their quarry out into the open. He suggested that since most of the murders were taking place around the railway and bus stations throughout the Rostov Oblast, a massive police presence should be implemented at all these stations, except for 3. The idea was to make a great show of being seen to question any man who stood out talking to a child, to make it obvious that the cops were around. The 3 stations deliberately left untouched were Kundryucha, Donleskos, and Lesostep, which were amongst their killers' favourite hunting grounds. However, there would be a highly discreet plainclothes agent at these 3 stations who would monitor the comings and goings, and with all of them being rural little-used stations, there would not be many people to watch. The operation commenced on the 27th of August, and it would not be too long before the killer took the bait. The plan was a masterstroke of genius, as Chikatilo had indeed seen the heavy police presence, and saw what they were doing by questioning anyone stood with a child, and then had further noticed that there were a couple of stations along his usual route where there didn't appear to be any police at all. And so, Chikatilo had deduced that these were the best places to continue his murderous ways, playing himself right into the hands of the authorities, although sadly, the days that followed until his capture would still result in the murders of Viktor Tishchenko and Svetlana Korostik. But crucially, Svetlana's murder in the woodland near Donleskos station was the tipping point in the case that gave them their prime suspect. As Chikatilo returned to the railway station, he had mud and grass stains on his hands, knees and elbows, along with a red smear on his face. This instantly sparked the interest of the undercover agent Igor Rybakov, as he observed Chikatilo emerging from the woods opposite the station. As he approached the platform, Rybakov accosted him and demanded to see his papers. But because there was no formal reason to arrest Chikatilo, he was allowed to carry on his way. Rybakov filed the report of the encounter and thought little more of it. However, the discovery of Svetlana Korostik's mutilated body 7 days later on the 13th of November led to the senior investigators to send for Rybakov to go through his reports from the previous week. It was this that revealed a familiar name, Andrei Chikatilo. This name was familiar to some of the long-serving agents, and so the lead was pursued. They decided to pull his employment record and saw that he had left 2 different teaching jobs, and so they approached the schools and asked them about his character. Of course, the old allegations of inappropriate conduct with his students came up, and very soon a picture was beginning to form that just maybe this was their man. With these extra insights in hand, it was decided to place Chikatilo under surveillance. Just as previously, he was observed approaching young women and children, attempting to engage them in conversation. This was enough for the agents to decide to bring him in. On the 20th of November, Chikatilo had just left his house with a jar that he intended to have filled with beer, once again trying to chat with children. He had visited a small cafe, and on his way out, 4 plainclothed agents approached him from all sides and informed him that he was under arrest. He did not bother to resist. He was cuffed and bundled into an unmarked car and whisked off to the cop shop. Finally, the beast was behind bars once and for all. At the police station, he complained bitterly that all of this was a big misunderstanding and that he had already been cleared of suspicion during his previous arrest in 1984, but little did he know it, there was now far more evidence against him, albeit circumstantial at this stage. One of these pieces of proof came to light during a detailed strip search when they noticed a deep bite mark on one of his fingers. This mark was matched to the teeth of Viktor Tishchenko. They also found it suspicious when it was revealed that he had not sought medical treatment for this wound, despite the fingernail being ripped off and the bone broken, merely treating the wound himself with iodine. A folding knife and 2 short lengths of rope were found in his clothing. Whilst he was being held, lead investigator Isa Kostoyev decided to play things much more carefully in a bid to elicit a non-forced confession. The idea being that if Kostoyev could convince Chikatilo that they were looking for someone who was seriously mentally deranged, he might take the bait and confess so that he could plead not guilty by reason of insanity. By Russian law, they had 10 days to work on him before they would be forced to release him. Blood samples were taken, and everyone worked furiously to get anything they could on him that could result in a formal charge. Once again, a setback occurred when the blood samples came back the next day, showing that he was Group A and not AB. But undaunted, they decided to go down a different track. The semen and saliva samples collected from 14 of the victims were tested against other samples taken from Chikatilo. In a rare instance of questionable luck, Chikatilo's semen apparently came back as Group AB, whilst his saliva was still Group A. A very rare occurrence. In fact, I somehow doubt that it was true, and indeed the scientist who made the discovery was roundly ridiculed for their published findings, but that's a separate story. Meanwhile, Chikatilo was constantly pleading that he had nothing to do with the murders, and so the forensic examiner, Dr. Bukhanovsky, who had examined all of the victims, was invited to sit in on the interrogation. He observed that Chikatilo did indeed exhibit the symptoms of mental abnormality and fit the psychological profile that he had previously drawn up. On the 27th of November, Dr. Bukhanovsky began to read out extracts from the profile to Chikatilo, and it was this that finally forced the beast to crack. He began crying as the assessment of his character and life story was read out, and he knew that every word of it was true. The shame welling up inside him. Finally, he was ready to talk turkey. At this point, the investigators decided to leave him alone for the evening and pick things back up in the morning. That next day marked the very last day that they could have legally held Chikatilo for, but thankfully, the morning resumption of the interrogation bore the fruit they needed. Chikatilo confessed to 36 of the 38 murders that they currently had on file that they were convinced were attributable to the same person. However, at this time, he denied having killed Luboyov Golochavka and Irina Pogoryalova, the latter of which I have not included in the above descriptions, but her body, found in Bataysk on the 18th of August 1986, did bear the classic mutilations of the other victims. However, I have been unable to locate any source that links her murder to Chikatilo, hence her omission. He did later confess to murdering another 4 people that he was not charged with, one of whom he specifically named as Irina Pogoryalova. Chikatilo provided a full and detailed description of each of the murders, all of which tied into the cases, even providing rough sketches of individual crime scenes and how the bodies were positioned, something only the killer would have known. He even described how he had become used to the spurts of blood and had learned ways in which to avoid getting any of it on him, describing how he would crouch down beside the victims whilst they bled out, listening to their final breaths before he continued the post-mortem mutilations, saying, quote, "Cries, the blood and the agony gave me relaxation and a certain pleasure." He further solved the mystery as to why he had paid close attention to the eyes of some of his victims, removing them or otherwise mutilating the eye sockets. He told the team that he used to believe in an old Russian superstition that the final image a dying person sees is imprinted on their eyes, and so had removed or damaged them to stop this potentially showing his face to investigators. As time progressed, he had decided that this was just a load of superstitious nonsense, and had stopped attacking the eyes in his latter murders. This superstition was also known about during the infamous Jack the Ripper murders in 1888's London. Most notably, the final canonical victim, Mary Jane Kelly, had had her eyes photographed in the hopes of revealing the identity of the Ripper, but of course we know that this is a myth. But you can't blame them for trying, though. I have made a thorough documentary of this case before, too. Link in the description. Chikatilo said that despite not being homosexual, he still gained the same thrill from his male victims as his female ones, and that he liked to taste their blood, which gave him an extra thrill. He further admitted to chewing on parts of his victims, most notably the uterus of females and the testicles of males. He even stated that at certain times he intentionally swallowed bitten off nipples and even tongues of some of his victims, bringing a cannibalistic edge to this already horrific case. Andrei Chikatilo was officially charged with 36 counts of murder. As the days went on, he would confess to a further 20. Chikatilo's trial began on the 14th of April 1992, with Judge Leonid Akubzanov presiding. When he appeared in court, he was rather unnecessarily placed in a cage specially constructed in the courtroom for his own protection. This was lapped up by the Russian press, who were sure to include the bars in every photograph of him to emphasize his monster status. They produced articles with sensationalist headlines, words like maniac, psycho, and cannibal plastered all over every news outlet. It took 2 whole days just to read out the list of indictments, now totaling 53, with relatives of the victims crying hysterically when their relative was arrived at. On one occasion, whilst being cross-examined, Chikatilo was asked how he found his victims. He replied, quote, "I did not need to look for them. Every step I took, they were there." Chikatilo attempted to plead insanity, regularly disrupting the courtroom with inane rambling objections, and even at one point, in perhaps the most infamous event of the trial, stripping naked and shouting at the court whether they thought he could commit such heinous sexual acts with this useless thing, pulling and slapping his penis in front of the assembled court. He was obstinate and uncooperative, but would occasionally comply and play along with proceedings purely at his own whim. When he was at his most disruptive, the judge would have him removed from the court and continue without him. The judge was not swayed by the insanity plea, and the death sentence was handed down. And unlike prisoners in Western countries, the Ruskies really do not fuck around, and they didn't wait long before the sentence was carried out. As part of his closing statement, the judge said, "Taking into consideration the horrible misdeeds of which he is guilty, this court has no alternative but to impose the only sentence that he deserves. I therefore sentence him to death." Naturally, Chikatilo did attempt to appeal this sentence to the Russian Supreme Court in the summer of 1993. He was informed that his appeal had been rejected. He was held in Novocherkassk while he awaited his day with the silent, unknown triggerman. Execution and legacy. On Monday the 14th of February 1994, Andrei Chikatilo was taken from his cell and plonked forcibly down in a chair in a specially soundproof execution chamber. A man stepped out from the shadows behind him and put a Makarov pistol to his head just behind his right ear. Chikatilo received a far easier death than his victims, probably not even having enough time to hear the click. Chikatilo is portrayed in a film about the case named Citizen X, and is well worth a watch. I mean, it's got Donald Sutherland in, which is an instant win for pretty much any movie.
Oh, man. Don't hit me with them negative waves so early in the morning.
Andrei Chikatilo was nothing short of a monster who preyed upon the young and vulnerable. I hesitate to call him a man, but a man who twisted the lines of morality and decency into a sickening warped reality where the pursuit of his own pleasure was his only care. The very act of killing was his aphrodisiac, his victims merely the vessels of his pleasure. He was a sad act, a pathetic, dickless excuse for a man, and yes, you can quite easily blame this on his childhood and upbringing, but it is no excuse for what he did. His sentence came far more easier than that of his victims, but nevertheless, justice was done in this instance. Evil acts deserve the most grievous response. We can be glad that someone so evil has been taken out of the evolutionary chain, and now he is unable to harm anyone else with his sordid ways. If there is the Christian version of hell, then Andrei Chikatilo has a VIP seat right next to the big red guy. Of that, there can be no doubt. We hope that all those unfortunates that fell into his clutches are now resting in peace and love ever after. Thank you for watching this video. I do hope you found it informative and interesting. If you did, please smash the old like button and consider sharing it with a like-minded friend to bring them into the fold. Check out my back catalogue to find even more great videos like this one. If serial killers and murders are your thing, then I have plenty of others in a playlist ready and waiting for you. What do you think of Andrei Chikatilo? Let me know in the comments. I suspect you've all got some very choice words to describe him, for sure. If you wish to do so, you can support DID on Patreon or become a channel member right here on YouTube. These regular small donations help me to carry on unearthing these gruesome stories for everyone to enjoy. And I say that in inverted commas, of course. Or if you would like something tangible in exchange for your financial support, there is always my merch store, where you can bag some swag and represent YouTube's foremost sexy voice narrator and creator. And don't forget to check out my much more family-friendly channel DID Reads, where I post things like short stories, poetry, famous speeches, and even children's stories. And in the meantime, take care of yourselves, and I shall see you on our next descent into darkness.